Okay, I know I said to all of you yesterday that the prior 48 hours had been really bad. Yesterday was really bad. I kind of feel like I don't know when that sensation is going to stop. I just hope you're all doing relatively well today. But I got to say, this morning has already brought with it a slew of really unpleasant news, and we have to talk about it. So welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 18th of June, 2025. For our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a cream-colored shirred top. My hair is pulled back. I have some small, I don't know, dangly earrings in, and I'm in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart, and I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay, so this morning was a Supreme Court decision day. I'm going to remind you all that all of the most significant opinions out of a Supreme Court term come at the end of June, occasionally carrying over into the first few days of July. And today was no exception. While we did have a number of decisions on things like the Clean Air Act, and prison rights, we also unfortunately had the decision Skirmetti, which we listened to live, many of us, back when the oral argument took place, and the incredible ACLU lawyer Chase Strangio became the first trans lawyer to argue in front of the Supreme Court. And unfortunately, the outcome of this case is awful. Like maybe could not be any worse, because what it decided first and foremost was that there is no heightened scrutiny standard under the 14th Amendment when it comes to trans kids, meaning that you don't have to show the courts don't have to show a heightened level of evaluation as to whether or not a given state law discriminates against a party or a group. So that leaves us with what's called the rational basis standard. And what the court determined was that there was a rational basis. This is where I start to get really angry. A rational basis to deny trans kids gender-affirming medical care under Tennessee law. And so the Tennessee ban on gender-affirming care for trans youth stands. And the thing about this that is terribly dangerous is that now essentially the Supreme Court has given a carte blanche to any other right-wing state legislature to pass an identical ban. So let's just get down to the nitty-gritty here on this, because folks need to understand what's at stake. The Trevor Project, which I would encourage all of you to donate to, like immediately, like today. They need as much money as we can give them. The Trevor Project works to prevent youth suicide in LGBTQ youth. And what that website shows from their own data is that when trans kids are denied gender-affirming medical care and or denied acceptance and affirmation in communities where they live, the suicide rates among trans youth skyrocket. They are already among the highest of any marginalized group. I think the last time I looked, it was something like 45% of trans and non-binary youth had attempted suicide at some point prior to the age of 18. What counterbalances that and lowers those suicidality rates at rapid pace is acceptance and affirmation by an adult in their own home, acceptance and affirmation in their own communities, and access to gender-affirming medical care. So let's make no mistake about it, okay? What the Supreme Court has done today is essentially sentence trans kids to death. And I'm not being overdramatic by saying that. They know, and they had evidence in the record of what the adverse effects of the confirmation of this law was going to do, and they did it anyway. The case split predictably along conservative to liberal lines. All 6 conservative justices were in the majority on this, with the 3 dissenters being the liberal wing. And, I just have to say a couple of things about this. I have been saying for quite some time that one of the things that is so profoundly dangerous about this is not only that the lives of children are being used as political pawns, but also that we're talking about human beings and their right to be free and to be who they are. And, I know trans kids who have committed suicide. I work right now with people who are therapists who have worked with trans kids who have committed suicide. And the threat of this, because of the lack of acceptance and the discrimination and the persecution that the Supreme Court has now rubber stamped, is very, very real. So when I have been saying to everyone, that you need to get out there and support trans folks, and you need to get out there and support trans kids, especially, even if you're cis, even if you don't know anybody who's trans or non-binary. I meant it, because we cannot police anybody else's bodies and expect our own bodies to be free. Okay. Now, this law sets up some very weird dichotomies. If you happen to be a cis boy and you develop breasts, which happens in some cis boys, you can have top surgery. If you have precocious puberty and you are a cis girl, you can take hormone blockers. But if you are trans, those things are denied to you. And if that's not per se discrimination, I don't know what is. So what we see here is that the Supreme Court has taken an ideological, not a legal position with regard to trans youth in this country. And it is starting with the bill in Tennessee, but we all know what it means. It essentially means that any other state that passes a law like this will be affirmed in the courts if challenged. And I just have to say that not only do I feel tremendous pain for the trans kids who are going to have to confront this head on, but also for their families, because not a lot of people have the resources that they need to move to a state where gender affirming care is going to be available. I know of stories of people who have fled the state of Texas, fled the state of Louisiana with their trans kids for the sake of safety and nothing but the vehicle they were driving in. And at the same time, one of the challenges of where we are right now is that there will be states where gender affirming care is available and where it is affirmed under state law. But even still, some of that is under threat. Gavin Newsom has been making noises about this already, in California, of all places. And so one of the things that we need to get really clear on is that we have to do everything we can within our power right now to support trans kids and their families. Financial, emotional, political, using your voices for change. This is a situation where it's now going to be on local communities and on friends and family to help get trans kids the care that they deserve if they're living in places where they can't get it. And that's going to mean things like, how are people going to go out of state to get that care? How are people going to move if that's what they decide they need to do, right? So that their kids survive. How are we going to help trans kids get into environments that lower their risk of self-harm? This is all very near and dear to me for a lot of reasons. And I just have to say that I have such sadness today and anger about the fact that the Supreme Court has decided to make pawns of our kids. Instead of saying, diagnosed by a doctor, medical treatment is needed, decision between parents and their kids, heightened standard of scrutiny applies, per se discriminatory, let the kids have what they need. That is the moral and humane decision. And that is not the decision that was made this morning. So all I can say is that, like, donations to the Trevor Project need to happen on a mass scale right now because they're going to be overwhelmed. And also that you, no matter who you are, no matter your gender identity, should reach out today to a local organization where you live that works with trans kids and ask how you can help, because they're going to need help too. There's going to be a deep need for the creation and the furtherance of spaces where trans kids feel safe, seen, and accepted. And you should make sure, to the extent that you can, that you are advocating at local school boards, at city councils, at your state legislatures for the safety and the medical care of trans kids. There are a lot of issues that are really key right now. And I know that we're all really struggling with where we are, but I'm just going to say this, okay? This is about the lives of children. Children. And in the same way that I get outraged by ICE ripping parents away from kids, I get outraged by the Supreme Court and Republicans and MAGA politicians with an agenda that includes nothing more than just seizing power and manipulating people, stealing the futures of trans kids. It's unspeakably evil to me. So please make donations today. Reach out to local LGBTQ support organizations. Ask how you can help. Honestly, like, we need to be out front on this. And I've been out front on this for a very long time. You all know I've spoken in front of school boards. I've advocated for the protection of trans and non-binary youth, including in my own communities. I've taken direct action with the schools that my kids go to, in the school districts that we've lived. These are not hard things. They may feel a little scary the first time you do it, but it's not hard. Standing up and talking about the rights of trans kids and non-binary kids and LGBTQ kids generally to live, to thrive, to have futures is something that every single one of us should be doing. And I just want to urge all of you, if you have not yet done that, if you've been quiet on it, if it hasn't been at the top of your priority list, now is the moment. Like, stand up and say something, get involved, and ask how you can help. Because it's really an all hands on deck argument right now, all hands on deck moment. So, and unfortunately, for those who don't know, the only way that a Supreme Court ruling can be overturned is either through legislation, meaning that a Democratic or progressive House and a Democratic or progressive Senate and a Democratic or progressive president pass legislation that says all trans youth in America should have access to gender affirming care, or this is what we're stuck with. So, again, legislation is what overturns Supreme Court decisions. And they can also overturn the standard of scrutiny that should apply through legislation under the 14th Amendment. There's no hope of that happening in the current state of affairs. And so it's on us to make sure that our trans kids know they're loved and are kept safe and can access the medical care that they need, and maybe get to states where they can get it if that's what needs to happen. Just critically important today. Yeah. So I'm not going to claim today's an easy one, because it's really, really not. All right. We have to talk about what's happening with regard to Iran, which is that at this point, Trump is spouting nonsense every 5 seconds. But we do know from some very practical movement of military equipment that the U.S. is building up a presence in the Gulf. Just a few hours ago, it was announced that a third aircraft carrier is being deployed to the Gulf in close proximity to Iran. And what that seems to indicate to me is that at the bare minimum, we're going to be giving support to Israel for purposes of this war that Israel has entered that it didn't need to enter. I talked about this a little bit yesterday. I don't know what to say to anybody about this, because this is entirely outside of our control. The one thing that you can do is make your phone calls about the resolution that was introduced by Thomas Massie, of all people, that states that the president should not get involved in any war with Iran without express approval from the Congress. And there is bipartisan support for that. Several dozen lawmakers have already signed on. AOC has signed on to it. Talk about strange bedfellows between Thomas Massie and AOC. But that's something you can call and advocate for. Again, I have to say that there is an ongoing issue inside Trump's base and supporters that is worth paying attention to. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, about the way in which some of the MAGA podcasters had started to turn on Trump and started calling for his impeachment because of the indication that he was going to get involved in a war with Iran. That got substantially worse yesterday. For those who missed it, if you want your daily dose of Schadenfreude, you should go find the interview that Ted Cruz did with Tucker Carlson, where Tucker Carlson literally, I'm not joking, took Ted Cruz apart at the seams over Ted Cruz wanting regime change in Iran without knowing its ethnic makeup, without knowing how many people lived there, without essentially knowing anything about the country. And read him the riot act. And they spent 2 full minutes screaming at each other. And one of the things that I just have to say that I think is really strange about this moment, because, there are lots of moments that those of us on the other side of the fence can look back on and be like, that should have been the moment where you gave up on MAGA. Like, all the way back to when he came down the escalator calling Mexicans rapists. You should have given up on MAGA. The moment where he mocked the disabled reporter, should have given up on MAGA, right? But now's apparently the moment for a bunch of people who really don't like the idea of the U.S. getting involved in a war with Iran. So Tucker Carlson is on that side. He doesn't think we should get involved in a war with Iran. And that's the reason why he literally, I have to say, I am absolutely no fan of Tucker Carlson. He's the scourge of the earth. He's evil, all right? And the interview that he did of Ted Cruz last night was masterful. Just absolutely slayed him. And it is a good reminder of what reporters could be doing to Donald Trump if they had the balls to actually ask him real questions about actual facts. Because what we would be seeing out of the media would be something very, very different in terms of the way in which Trump's capacity and his decision-making and his policies are being spun. So I do want to encourage everybody to go watch the Tucker Carlson interview. By the way, clips of it are all over Blue Sky. If you scroll down my feed, you're going to see a bunch of them. But once again, I have to say the very odd silver lining of this conflict between Israel and Iran now is that it is absolutely set. It's like splintering Trump's most loyal supporters. And that's really not a bad thing. Like really, really not a bad thing to have some of the most prominent MAGA podcasters out there now calling for his impeachment, to have people like Tucker Carlson calling into question senators who are hard MAGA and their decision-making and whether or not they have a rational basis to do anything that they're doing. This is all really good for the base to see, because the people who are watching Tucker Carlson are the people who think Tucker Carlson is right. And what this means going forward is a big question. Now, every single time I've talked about Tucker Carlson on social media or here now for the last couple of days, everybody's like, he's in Putin's pocket. I don't care. I'm just going to say that. There are plenty of people in the Trump administration who are aligned with Vladimir Putin. It makes no difference to me that Tucker Carlson is aligned with Russia or Putin if the work that he is doing is to take apart Donald Trump. Okay? I think we've actually got to start being smart about this, because what we want is their base to fracture. What we want is to have podcasters who were previously aligned, media figures who were previously aligned with Trump now calling out his bullshit. Like, this is actually part of the way that things start to change. So one of the things that I think people need to be mindful about is that when the party is eating itself alive, when MAGA is eating itself alive, our job is to stay silent and let them do it, right? Because the only way that the base is going to change, the base is going to lose faith, that they're going to give up on Trump, and then things start to shift dramatically. They find out they've been lied to. They didn't commit to sending their sons and their daughters and their kids into war, right? On a foreign soil about something that nobody really knows exactly what the purpose of it is. Where they're like losing their jobs because of tariffs, and, you know, like folks can't afford to buy basic necessities, and SNAP benefits disappear and Medicaid disappears. The ways in which those people start to actually wake up is exactly this kind of stuff. So we have to be fully, I don't want to say behind it, but we have to be fully willing to allow them to do it. Like, criticizing Tucker Carlson at this moment, we can all say, like, you know, he's a horrible human being, right? But do we want him to stop doing this? Absolutely not. More, please. Like, I want to see him take apart people like, you know, Andy Biggs, right? I would love to see him take apart people like Marco Rubio, right? I mean, this is good for like the general progress of the nation. So let's watch it happen. You know, I mean, and again, this is something that is only just beginning. I got to say this, if like we actually get involved in military warfare against Iran, because the other thing about that interview with Ted Cruz is that Ted made a mistake at one point in that interview. And he said, we're attacking Iran. And then Tucker was like, wait a minute, we're breaking news here. Are we involved in this attack on Iran already? No, we're just backing up Israel. We're just behind Israel. We're supporting Israel in this work. If we actually get involved in this, that whole wing of the MAGA brosphere is going to frickin' implode. And by the way, that's not a bad thing. There's still going to be far right-wing Nazis, don't get me wrong. But if they step away from Trump, things change a lot. So very important to kind of be aware of this and like bear witness. Okay. Yesterday in the federal courts building in downtown Manhattan, I've been there many times, tried many cases there. Brad Lander, who is one of the mayoral candidates for New York City and currently the city's chief comptroller, which means he's like the chief financial officer of New York City, which is, of course, the biggest city in the country, showed up, as he has done several times before, to walk immigrants who have had their cases dismissed. I'm going to remind you all, this is intentional. Immigration judges are under the control of the executive branch, and ICE currently has this thing in place where they get administrative judges to dismiss cases, which puts people on no status inside the United States, fully undocumented if their cases are dismissed because there's nothing in process, and then they kidnap them right outside of the courtroom. Okay, this is happening all over the country. Brad Lander showed up to escort people like this out of the courtroom and out of the building so that they would not be kidnapped by ICE. He's done this several times before with no event. Yesterday, he did it, and ICE stepped in to try to kidnap the man that he was walking with. And Brad Lander asked for a warrant because, of course, it is illegal to arrest somebody in this country without a warrant. And rather than responding to that, because by the way, there's no crime in asking if ICE has a warrant. You're not committing a crime by asking that. Instead of answering that question, they essentially assaulted him, pinned his hands behind his back, put him in a chokehold, and took him into detention themselves. City controller of the city of New York, second most powerful person in the New York City government. They detained him for 3.5 hours. No charges were filed, and then they released him. And I have to say, on the heels of what happened with Senator Alex Padilla, what happened with the judge in Wisconsin, what's happened with the arrest of Ross Baraka outside the Delaney Detention Center here in New Jersey, this is now a pattern of threat. Because essentially what they're saying is we can do it to anybody. We don't need a basis for it. You don't have to. We don't care if you're an American citizen or not. We don't care if you're a senior official in government. We don't care who you are. We operate outside the rules and we will take you down if we want to. They are a rogue mob. ICE is a rogue mob and it has to be abolished. So Brad Lander was released, and all credit to him. He then stood in front of the courthouse where a huge protest had emerged during the time that he was detained, after his wife had taken over his account on Blue Sky and was posting on his behalf, and said, I'm okay and I'm going to get to sleep in my bed tonight. But the man that I was walking down the hallway with is not okay. He's still detained. He's not sleeping in his own bed, and he has no idea where he's going. And that is exactly the right response. And one of the things that we have to take away from this, because I just have to point something else out, like ICE is changing its tactics now because of the uproar over what they're doing. There was some footage about this from Los Angeles yesterday where now to go into, like, say, a Home Depot parking lot, they're coming in with like 10 trucks and a huge swath of people, and they kidnap maybe 2 people, and they're in and out of there in 5 minutes because they're afraid. They're afraid now of average everyday citizens stepping up and stopping them. We talked last week how there are incidents now where ICE has literally been run off and run totally out of certain communities. They know they're losing. This is one reason, by the way, why they keep covering their faces. They don't want their neighbors to know what they do for a living because they're ashamed of it, right? So one of the things that we have to keep doing here is continuously keep showing up. And speaking of the face coverings, California's legislature did initiate a bill yesterday that would require no face coverings for police officers and other forms of law enforcement, including ICE. I have to say that one of the things that is the most disturbing about this whole thing, from the perspective of how we interact with law enforcement in our day-to-day lives, is that you now have no idea. Somebody shows up at your door in plain clothes, separated, from any form of identification, with their face covered. You're supposed to assume that they're like legitimate law enforcement. And that's crazy. Like, that's not how it's supposed to be. So California's initiation of this law is really important. We're going to have to see where it goes and what happens next. But it's very important to know that, like, certain states are fighting back. And you can also advocate for that where you live. You can go to your state legislature or call your state representative or senator and say, we need a bill like this. Because I want to know if, like, ICE is operating in my area, that they actually have badges and we know who they are, instead of just like random white supremacists kidnapping people off the street. So, which they also are, by the way, but that's another story. Really important to be advocating for those kind of laws. Okay. I am not going to be here on Friday. I announced this yesterday because that is Juneteenth observed where I live. So there will be no broadcast on Friday and no Progressive Coffee Hour on Friday, because it's also a school holiday here et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So no broadcast on Friday. Tomorrow is Juneteenth, the correct date. So happy early Juneteenth to everybody who's watching here. There will be a broadcast tomorrow. I just want to remind everybody that if you are interested in doing more mobilizing work where you live, and who isn't these days, you really should be, you should go download our guide on how to mobilize without burning out. And there's a link to it already in the show notes in the box below this broadcast. You should go get it. Also, I will make sure that it is linked in the comments below. But please also remember that, you know, all this action that we've seen in the streets needs to not go for naught. You have to be continuously involved where you live in creating change, especially around issues like, you know, police officers wearing masks, or around issues of protecting trans kids. These are really critical things that we've talked about today. Your involvement where you live is, like, in my view, mandatory right now, unless you are homebound, immune compromised, or disabled and can't actually do that kind of work. But all the rest of us have to be out there in our own communities doing something right now. And I know in this audience, there's a lot of people who feel compelled to make a difference. Like, if you have not yet stepped out to try to do that, to figure out how your skills should be moving in that direction, just download the guide. It's going to make a big difference for you, and it's going to get you started on the right path. Okay, please like this broadcast. Don't forget to subscribe. Give me the thumbs up. Hit that bell notification. Drop me a comment if you're watching after the fact. I'm here, as you all know, 4 days a week live right now. We also have something new coming up that I'm going to announce maybe tomorrow, in the form of a second YouTube channel. But I'm gonna hold off on that until we're actually there. All right. So more coming on that tomorrow. All right, my friends. Have a good rest of your day. Please use your voices today. Make phone calls, make donations to the Trevor Project, and I will catch you all here live tomorrow. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.